So I'm Derek from Soilwork, drummer for Soilwork.
You are from Belgium.
Yes.
How did you end up in Soilwork, Swedish band?
Actually, I lived in France for most of my life, and one day I got a call from Peter Wichers back in the day when he was still in the band, and they were looking for a touring drummer, and they had heard my other band, Scarf, a French band. I loved it, so that's how I ended up in Soilwork. I did a bunch of tours with them for a while. And then, just ended up being the drummer after a year and a half, so that's pretty much the story.
Talk a little about the other bands you play for and, what each, I guess, brings to your life.
Well, basically nowadays I pretty much play only for Soilwork because it's a very busy band, lots of tours, lots of work, so I don't really have the time to do any more touring at this point with other bands. But until recently, of course, I worked with Scarf very much, which was my original band. Worked with them for 14 years, and I'm not sure what's going to happen now in the near future, but I doubt that I will have the time to do it because we're just on the road the whole time. So other than that, there are several projects that I take part in. One of them is called Phase 1. It's with two HARDTIMES.CA members. It's more or less a studio project. We did one album. Going to do another one probably later this year. There's my new Liver 2 band. That's a guitar player from France that I've played with pretty much since '95. There is One Way Mirror, which is a new project coming out with Guillaume of Nemic, ex-singer of Scarf, the bass player of Scarf, and the two guys from Phase 1, HARDTIMES.CA, are also in that. That's coming out in a few months. And recently I also recorded drums for Warl Dane's first solo album, Singer of Nevermore, which was recorded and written by Peter Wichers mostly. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've got going on right now.
Talk a bit about the Warl Dane project, if you can. How did that come about, and what was it like working with Peter again and with Warl?
It was great. I mean, personally, I've been a fan of Nevermore since their first album. I heard one of their tracks on a Century Media compilation, and I bought the album, and I loved it. And ever since then, I've always been a huge fan of his voice. And so when I heard that from Peter, who's a good friend of ours, I heard that he was going to do a solo album and stuff like that. I was like, I have to play on it. And so eventually it happened. It took a while. Like everything took a while to get together. We've been talking about it for a long time, but then finally it happened, and he pretty much got me the job. And so went to Baltimore for a week and recorded drums there with Peter. And yeah, I think the result is really cool. I have the finished album, and it's coming out on May 13th, I think, in the US, Canada, and it turned out really good. It's very different. Like drumming wise from what I usually do. It's very straightforward, like stripped down, groovy stuff. There's not that much technical stuff going on, so that was pretty interesting for me.
Of course. The week in Baltimore, what were your observations?
Working with Peter is always a blast. He was my first contact with Soilwork pretty much, and he's a great guy, a great musician, very fun person to hang around with, and very professional. So it was just very easy, very relaxed, just having a blast basically.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Young drummers who are starting to play, or active drummers who would like to really improve their style, become unique, become avant-garde, if you could use the term, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would mainly say to have an open mind towards music and to not limit themselves to the style that they like to play. It's easy to get lost in metal and listen to all different kinds of metal, and I'm not saying that you can be a good metal drummer or a good drummer if you only listen to metal, but I think a lot of other styles of music have interesting things going on and different things that aren't necessarily to be found in metal, and they can bring new ideas. One of my very big influences, other than Dave Lombardo, was Sean Reinert. Played with Death on the Human album, and of course with Cynic and a whole bunch of other stuff after that. And he, when he came onto the metal scene, he just had a lot of jazz fusion influences, and that was totally back in the day, it was unheard of pretty much, and it was a huge influence for me. And I realized that shortly around that time, actually, I went to a music school and was in touch with people from all kinds of different musical backgrounds, and I just I had people just copy me pretty much everything, like whatever it was, I didn't care, you know, and I just listened to everything, tried to play everything, took classes in every single, you know, jazz, like Afro-Cuban rhythms, whatever there was, you know, and I couldn't play any of those styles because I'm not, you know, not specialized enough in that, but I did take a lot of influences from there and put them in my playing, which, you know, like, I think it's the only way to really do something unique is do your own thing, create your own exercises, have your own patterns going on, and just think outside of the box, you know, pretty much.
That's some great advice, truly.
Thanks.
One thing I also want to ask you, now the American metalcore movement, bands like Shadows Fall, Killswitch Engage, All That Remains, this style has become a bit of, I guess, kind of laughing stock of you know, the metal scene here in North America, just because it's everywhere here.
Yeah.
However, Soilwork have been influenced by Killswitch Engage, I believe, and you guys kind of have an affinity for these bands. Talk a bit about your change in perspective compared to the Americans.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like Killswitch have always been very vocal about, you know, how Soilwork was an influence to them, and you know, I think that it's just a matter of the markets being very different. In Europe, it's not so easy to sell the amount of records that in metal that bands sell here. You know, it's just pretty much impossible, actually, unless you're Rammstein or some other, you know, very unique or very commercially oriented metal band. You know, I think in the U.S. and Canada, there's such a big scene and there's so many people, and it's such a rock culture, much more as opposed to like countries like France. There's no rock culture at all. You know, what they call rock is like basically pop music. You know, they're not really open to like the extreme stuff. It stays very underground. So probably changing now with the new generations and stuff, but compared to the US, it's nothing. So I think it's like that's just kind of the difference, you know. And I think that metalcore, I mean, it's always the same thing. Whenever a style comes up and it gets successful, labels sign all the young bands that play that thing that are influenced by that. And that doesn't mean these kids aren't sincere, you know. That's what they listen to. They're 16 or 18 or whatever, so they play that stuff just like any band plays, kind of imitates their heroes on their first two recordings, and then it, you know, but now it just overflows the market and everyone's like, haha, metalcore is the same old shit again. So that's what happened with death metal in the early 90s, that's what happened with black metal in the, you know, late 90s. It's always the same pattern that repeats. So that's what I think about it.
What is the next trend in metal?
I wouldn't know, man. That's a tough question, but you know, I think it's interesting to see that metal is still there, you know, and that there's still very creative and talented bands going on, despite, you know, the whole business aspect sometimes creating a barrier to those things. You know, artists will never, you know, stop being innovative and stuff. So it's, you know, it also gets hard when you get older. You become more critical, and it's definitely harder to like really get into something as when you're a young kid and you're like completely blown away by what happens, you know, after, I mean, I've been listening to metal now since I was like 12, so that's now like 21 years. So, you know, it takes a little more for me to really be impressed, but I think there's still like a lot of amazing bands out there, you know. I mean, bands like Opeth, Nevermore, and, you know, Nile, and like in all kinds of different styles. I'm a huge Napalm Death fan, like, you know, I mean, they're still completely blazing. Like, I mean, there's all kinds of great stuff going on, so I think it's, you know, it's hard to say what's going to be next, but I'm sure that there's going to be great metal, that's for sure. You're on HARDTIMES.CA, and this is Dirk from Soilwork.